Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is all roads lead to Denerim in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. 1. The Thief. Maker's oily pig breath, the red-headed elf cursed as she swept through the door. She swiftly crossed to the kitchen table and let the soft bundle in her arms drop onto it. I want new cousins. Those two dunderheads are obviously defective. Uncle Syrian chuckled, glancing up from his cooking. Need I remind you, Shiani, that one of those dunderheads is my son? Exactly. She crossed her arms, but the smirk on her lips assured her uncle of how serious she wasn't. I blame you. Syrian's smile was gentle yet amused as he returned to dicing. And what is it, pray tell, that I am taking the blame for this time? Apparently, they didn't show up to their fittings this afternoon, which of course meant that Carria came at me with those nasty needles of hers. Shiani raised her voice in an unflattering imitation of the elven community's tailor. If that layabout doesn't care enough about his own wedding to show up for his fitting, then I don't care about it enough either. And then she thrust a pile of cloth into my arms and stalked off. She gestured toward the bundle on the table. What am I supposed to do with cloth? I asked myself. Really expensive cloth, I might add? And then it hit me. I can strangle them with it. Seems only fair, right? The elder elf was barely holding back laughter. Shiani, you are not strangling my son. Well, fine. But I'm not sewing any wedding outfits, either. Let Sorais and Finian say their vows plumb naked, for all I care. She paused thoughtfully, then let out an amused snort. Actually, that certainly would liven things up around here. Shiani. Oh, don't even pretend to be scandalized, Uncle. I can see right through you. The elder finally tilted his head back and laughed. Then, he turned his smile to her and shook his head in exasperation. Be that as it may, perhaps you should go fetch the boys. To warn them of Carria's wrath, at the least. Shiani let out the most put-upon sigh she could muster. Fine, fine. I'll go find them and sick them on Carria. But only because I want to watch Finn try to talk his way out of this one. She snagged a piece of carrot that Syrian was currently trying to prepare for dinner, and bounded out the door to the sound of his gentle scolding. The alienage was alive in the late afternoon. The buildings may have been sparse and sagging, but the people were as warm and familiar as ever, greeting one another by name and exchanging pleasantries as they went about their business. Old Mariel was under the great tree, telling her grandchildren about its history again. The Geralt twins were just returning from work at the Howe estate, looking as haggard as ever. Poor guys, some nobles were easier on their servants than others. Arl Howe was, by all rumors, not. And there went Valandrian, no doubt rushing past to quell some dispute in the alienage. Alienage life wasn't the easiest, but it was home, and it was the people in it that made it so. Though there were two particular people who Shiani was feeling less than homey toward at the moment. If only she could find them to tell them so on no uncertain terms. She spotted Ma Terran as the older elf puttered in her scraggly patch of scrub brush that counted as a garden in the alienage. Hey, Ms. Terran. Yes, child. No need to yell. The elderly elf squinted up at her. You mar those pretty features of yours every time you open that mouth, you know. Shiani rolled her eyes, but smiled, because she knew the elder meant the words fondly. Probably. I'm looking for my cousins. Have you seen them today? Ah, that little rascal was skiving off again, was he? Ma Terran tooted, smoothing the soil in her garden. That certainly explains the grin on his face when he left. Shiani leaned on the fence, relieved. Leave it to one of the community busybodies to keep an eye on the troublemakers. Left? So he's out in the city. And dragged poor dumb Sorais with him. Getting into trouble in the market, no doubt. Ma Terran rolled her eyes, turning her attention back to her garden. Better go rescue him, girl. Now shoo. Shiani nodded her thanks and turned to head toward the wrought iron gate that separated their world from the one outside. Shiani had been out in Denerim proper plenty of times, usually to visit the taverns down by the docks, and that was beside the point, but she still didn't like it all that much. The Shems expected certain things. They wanted their elves acting a certain way, all quiet and demure and subservient, all things that Shiani was very much not. And she preferred it that way, thank you very much. But still, a city elf that didn't lower their eyes got noticed, and getting noticed by Shems was a bad thing. Shiani scoped the market crowd, wandering through the stalls idly in hopes of spotting her wayward cousins. When she finally did find the two slender forms of a pair of elf men, she sighed, because they were currently proving that very point. Think I didn't see your fingers wander a bit too close to that woman's pocket, elf, the stern-faced guardsman was saying as Shiani approached. No weapons had been drawn yet, but the guard's hand was on the pommel of his sword in clear threat. Sarais was, of course, in full by the maker weary gonna die mode, his eyes frantically darting around as if searching for an escape. He spotted Shiani, his eyes both relieved and pleading. Finian, though, was too occupied with the guardsman to notice Shiani's approach. He had stepped in front of Sarais, as if to act as a shield, but his posture was artfully non-confrontational, down to the hands stuffed shyly in his pockets. He stared down at his shoes, his brown bangs falling over his lowered eyes in a move that Shiani had seen far too many times to be fooled by. My apologies, sir. I swear I wasn't stealing. But the leather of her belt, it was. I was simply overcome. The guard blinked, obviously taken off guard. What? Finian raised his eyes, all big and brown and entirely too disarming for his own good. The etchings on the belt were like my mother's. His head lowered again, his voice shaking. She died some time ago. The guard's hostility faded. He looked around uncertainly, as if looking for backup or confirmation, then turned back to Finian. Roughly, he growled, be that as it may, don't let it happen again, knife ears. With that, the guard whirled on his heels and stalked off. As soon as the guard was out of sight among the market stalls, Finian straightened up and grinned back at Sarais. I don't want to say I told you so, no, actually I do. I wish we had put a bet on it. Shiani stepped up next to the pair, crossing her arms. And how did that guard not recognize you, cousin? He turned his mischievous grin to her. He's new. Sarais sagged against the nearest stall in relief. Him and most of the other guards, since all the real fighters are apparently headed south. Finn's been testing out the newbies all day. Finian shrugged. So far, I'm not particularly impressed. A few look suspiciously inbred. All day, huh? Shiani asked pointedly, struggling to stifle her grin. Damn it, she was supposed to be mad at him. Forget something else you were supposed to do today. Finian's brown eyes went wide and innocent, but Shiani knew him far too well to be fooled. Oh, right. The fitting. It completely slipped my mind that Carria wanted to poke and prod me in intimate places. Sarais snorted. That isn't usually the sort of thing most people forget, cousin. Finian's mask broke as he burst out laughing. You have a point. Some sincerity finally slipped into his visage as he gave Shiani a wry look. I suppose you were the one she came after. Shiani waved off the implied apology with a smirk. Never upset a woman who's good with needles, dummy, or you might find one in your eye. Better yet, never upset a woman, period. Sound advice all around. The trio turned and started back in the direction of the alienage. I suppose it's advice we should both take to heart, Sarais said. Since we're both going to be married soon. Finian waved dismissively. I don't know why everyone keeps saying that. It's all blatant lies. What, that you're betrothed? Shiani laughed. Sarais, I think he's onto us. He knows it's all a conspiracy to get him to reform his roguish ways. What will we do now that he's caught on? Sarais didn't seem to want to play along, instead eyeing their cousin with his brow furrowed. Cousin, this is getting a little worrying. My wedding is less than a month off, and yours won't be long after that, depending on when your betrothed can come down from however. Maybe it's time to drop the game. It's not a game. Guys. Shiani started warningly, not wanting to see this particular argument now. It had been brewing for weeks, really, but did it really need to happen in front of a bunch of shems? Sarais ignored her. He stopped walking, right in the middle of the road, just to stare at the other man. Not a. Finian, we're getting married. This is supposed to be exciting, it's a rite of passage. Into what? Finian whirled, face darker than she and he had seen since Aunt Adea died. A life shackled to some woman I don't know? And what for? Tradition? Tradition is what keeps us in that miserable cage. Always spat on by the humans, stooping and bowing for the so-called privilege of working in some spoiled noble's household, because tradition dictates we can't do any better. What kind of life is that? People were staring, most narrow-eyed at the sight of an elf ranting in a public square. Ranting about them even, which she and he would have found amusing if she couldn't see a pair of armed guards making a swift approach. Guys, let's go, she and he urged. We have to make do with what we have, Sorais implored. I'm not getting married. I'm going to find some way out of it, and then I'm going to get out of that place and give you, and she and he, and my father, and everyone a better life. We all deserve to be free, completely and truly, for once. If you ask me, a harsh voice drawled, you Nifers got enough freedom already. The guards had reached them. You enjoy making your scene, elf? Because it's time for you to leave the stage or be dragged off it. The guard then chortled at his own bad joke. Sorry, sir, she and he swooped in, because Finian appeared too riled up to work his usual magic. We were just going. Nah, I think you wanna stay a bit longer. The other guard cracked his knuckles. Maybe see how loud you can really shout, huh? That will be enough, boys, a third voice chimed in, and the two guards snapped to attention as a third armored figure stepped up to them. Sergeant Keelan, these elves were just on their way, as they said. The sergeant eyed all three elves sternly, but without the casual contempt that most shems showed. The two of you may go. The pair of guards stalked off, muttering. Tabri, turn out your pockets. She and he barked a laugh, then slapped a hand over her mouth. Finian cracked a wry smile and did as ordered. She and he was honestly surprised when nothing fell out of them but a couple silvers and a feather, though she did catch a glimpse of something shiny disappearing up her cousin's sleeve. The sergeant stared flatly at Finian for a moment, obviously not for a second believing that Finian was innocent. Her cousin wasn't even trying to act it, grinning cheekily up at the guard. Finally, Sergeant Keelan sighed. One of these days, elf. Now go. I don't want to see you here for the rest of the day. Finian dipped an elegantly mocking bow and scooped up his dropped silvers. A pleasure as always, Sergeant. Finian was practically skipping with triumph as they headed back home, his previous argument obviously forgotten. They were nearly at the wrought iron gate when she and he finally burst out, I don't believe for a second that your pockets were empty. With a smirk, her wily cousin produced a golden sovereign from his sleeve. A little sleight of hand goes a long way, dear cousin. Sorais groaned. You're lucky your sleight of hand hasn't gotten the hand cut clean off. And mine too. They crossed the bridge into the alienage. Now, the other man said smoothly, we all know that cutting off hands is really only a punishment for thievery. For abetting a criminal, well, you'd probably just hang. Not funny. So very not funny. Finian led them to Caria's shop, she and he followed because she couldn't not watch this exchange. Donning his most disarming smile, and he had a broad selection of those to choose from, Finian knocked and poked his head through the banged-up wooden door of the tailor's shop. Immediately, Caria's voice screeched out. Oh, and there he is now, come to try to wheedle more work out of the old tailor. Because she has nothing else to do but wait on his whims all day. Finian slid into the shop, oozing regret and apology. Sorais followed after, his contrite posture much more sincere. She and he came in last, closing the door behind them. The tailor was at her work table, graying blonde hair pinned up while she worked on what appeared to be someone's servant's garb. She glared flatly at Finian, no doubt in her mind who was responsible for the pair's earlier absence. And she was right, of course. She and he loved Sorais, really, but Andraste's ass was the man easily led. Caria, Finian began smoothly, I cannot express just how sorry I am that we missed our appointment. This should be good, the older woman said snidely, crossing her arms. She and he agreed wholeheartedly. It's just, while I was out in the market this morning, I saw the most amazing hairpin lined with silver and carved so beautifully. I just had to get it for you, in return for working so hard on the wedding outfits for Sore Eyes and me. A hairpin? Why would Carria want a hairpin? Shiani cast a puzzled look at Sore Eyes, who shrugged nervously. Carria, however, looked stunned, her hand going up to touch her hair. After a beat of silence, Finian stepped forward, reaching into his shirt to pull out a small, flat box. I spent most of the day running messages in the marketplace, but I still wouldn't have been able to afford it if Sore Eyes hadn't helped. I fear I caused us to miss our appointment. I'm such an idiot, I know. He presented the box, and Carria took it with wide eyes. When she opened it, Shiani swore she saw the tailor get a little misty-eyed. It is, quite exquisite. And thoughtful. She glanced at Sore Eyes, then gave Finian a wry look. Who knew you had it in you? Finian cast his eyes down. I understand if you don't want to work on our garb anymore, of course. Nonsense, Carria sniffed, setting the pin aside. We can't very well have the two of you taking your vows in your small clothes. Though it certainly would liven things up, Shiani put in, only to receive a scolding look from the elder. Tomorrow morning, both of you. Not a moment past noon. I mean it. She looked at them sternly. Now out with you, I've much to do. Obediently, the trio left. Maker's balls, cousin, Shiani said with a low whistle as they crossed the alienage. You planned that. You have got to be the most manipulative little scoundrel I've ever seen. He smirked. But I've got a heart of gold, somewhere. And a tongue so silver it could pay for an Arling. Your hurtful words wound me, cousin. Finn's hand went to his heart dramatically. So much so, that I fear I cannot muster the strength to present you with your purloined gift. You pickpocketed me a gift? How noble and sweet. Finian reached into his vest and pulled out a slender bottle. Again, with the wounding words. I fear I will need this instead, to drown my sorrows. He smiled teasingly, waving the bottle around. By the maker, you can be overdramatic, can't you? Finian winked. It's an Orlchion vintage. I think. Shiani laughed and took the bottle when it was presented to her, knowing that this was probably a wine none of them would ever have been able to afford. Still, it was hard to be horrified of Finian's blatant law-breaking, because it wasn't like he stole from people who couldn't afford it. If him pickpocketing a few uppity Shem nobles meant they got a couple nice things, she wasn't going to be the one to call him out on it. He just wanted everyone to be happy. And free, too, but that wasn't something any amount of charm or nimble fingers could provide. To the soldier. The cavern's stale air was thick with the sense of sweat and blood. The air was a din of the clashes of metal on metal, metal on flesh, and the screams of the dying all joined in a cacophony that drowned out all words. It was a frenzy of survival and death, no politics outside the inevitable consensus of who killed whom first. It was just the way Marnan Ejikin liked it. Prepare the rock slide. Commander Blackstone barked out from somewhere behind her. Her war axe cleaved in the skull of another genlock, and she spared a glance at him from under her steel helm as she yanked it out. He stood on a defensible outcropping 10 paces back, his thick black beard matted with dark spawn blood. In reaction to his order, a trumpet sounded, 2 long brays followed by a short. It echoed across the expansive cavern where the expeditionary force had made their attack. They had over 100 darkspawn pushed up against a cliff face, the monsters fighting vainly against the best soldiers Orzammer had to offer. My lady. Left. Reacting unthinkingly to that most trusted of voices, Marnan dove to her left, just in time to dodge the swing of a Hurlock's blackened greatsword. The creature roared and spat, but Marnan wasted no time in introducing her axe to the back of its knees. It crumpled with a monstrous shriek, only to be silenced by Gorham's sword going into its eye. Marnan nodded to her longtime right-hand man and friend, and he nodded back. No need for words or gestures of gratitude when there were darkspawn to kill. The dwarves tending the trap would be ready by now. Marnan shoved a genlock away, waiting for the signal. Fall back. The commander's voice shouted. Back. By the stone, where did that trumpeter go? Marnan spared another look around, and cursed again as she saw the trumpeter's limp body 30 paces in a swarm of monsters away. Resolutely, she stamped on a genlock that was still twitching, and raised her axe so as to be better seen. Free hands, to me. We must retrieve the trumpet. Here, my lady. Gorim's voice responded immediately. My lady. Here. Sounding off. At your order, my lady. No more voices responded, but a squad of 6 would do. She charged into the swarm of darkspawn that had overtaken the dwarven force's right arm, trusting her men to be at her back. She could hear them behind her, cutting a swath of destruction as they became a V-shaped prong with her at the apex. The monsters roared and charged at her, but she did not fear them. This was her purpose, her true honor, to face the darkspawn and cut them down. At last, the squad reached the fallen trumpeter. The rumbling sound was positively ominous now, the floors shaking with it. Without hesitation, she raised the bloody trumpet to her lips and blew 3 wild, short clips. Immediately, the dwarven lines began to pull back. She could practically feel the collective sigh of relief at the order, but she smiled. The line had not broken during the wait. She was damn proud of her city's warriors. No sooner had they vacated the battlefield than did a rumbling tumble of rocks roll over it, pouring out of a hidden crevice the dwarves had commandeered and crushing all in its path. Darkspawn roared and were silenced by the stones, the swarm cut easily in half. Commander Blackstone raised his sword. Back in, men. We must take the Tague. Those nearby roared in agreement, and Marnan smiled as she blew the order's corresponding cadence on the trumpet. The line surged back forward, sweeping over the darkspawn with new energy. Marnan pulled back from the front lines, because that was nowhere for a signal trumpet to be. She headed over to where the commander and his defenders held their position, out of the fighting for the moment. Secretly, she hoped that one of them would offer to take the trumpet. Wait, why secret? This was the army, not the assembly. There was no need to mince words here. Someone take this so I can get back to killing. Commander Blackstone laughed. Always eager for sport, my lady. It is good to have you along, as always. It is good to be along, thus why I am here. Now really. Someone take this. One of the commander's escort laughed and obediently took the thing. He attempted to wipe the blood off, only for his equally gory gauntlet to make things worse. Should have been born warrior caste, I always say, Commander Blackstone said. Be mindful of who you're speaking to, Gorim's voice piped up behind her. It's all right, Gorim. She cast him a smile from under her helm. Would that I had been. I find myself much more suited to this than my own caste's particular brand of sport. Of that, I have no doubt, the commander said, raising his sword in a strange sort of toast. He cast out over the fighting, and Marnan was pleased to note that it seemed to be dying down. The last of the darkspawn were being routed, the Tague nearly won. A strong success to bring home, Commander Blackstone declared, and then something unexpected happened. The darkspawn got reinforcements. They swarmed from behind the dwarves, pouring into the chamber from multiple exits to flank the dwarven line. Marnan only realized what was happening when a genlock charged into her from behind, biting and clawing at her armored form. She kicked it off with some difficulty, only for the thing to latch onto her helm. Its claws reached into the helm, trying to pry out her eyes. She hastily undid her chin strap and shoved the helm off, just so she could dash the thing's head against the stones. It took 4 blows before it went limp. Marnan paused to catch her breath, assessing the situation through a curtain of red, shoulder-length hair. The dwarven force was completely outnumbered and scattered, the black spread of darkspawn thick throughout the chamber, only occasionally broken up but a cluster of shiny dwarf fighters. My lady. Gorim panted, a new red line across his face where a sword had struck. They flanked us. Indeed, she agreed. We've been outmaneuvered by mindless monsters, how is that even possible? It's not. Not unless something is controlling them. She shook her head in disbelief. They needed to retreat and reassess, she realized. The Tague was lost, and there was no point losing any more perfectly good warriors on a lost battle. She looked around for the commander, hoping he would agree. Only to find him in the fight of his life with a creature 4 times his size. An ogre. The commander's defenders were a bloody pile on the cavern floor, so the commander stood alone against the beast. It was huge, and horned, and far more fearsome than anything Marnan had ever encountered in the deep roads. It let out a monstrous bellow, and answering cries could be heard among the swarm. The commander stood his ground, much to his honor. He dodged a slam that might have crushed him, swiping his sword along the back of the thing's knees. The ogre barely seemed to notice the injury, whirling around to swipe a heavy arm at the commander. The dwarf was caught in it this time, and thrown farther than could possibly have been healthy. "Commander Blackstone!" Marnan cried, and dove in to take on the great beast herself. She thought she heard Gorim yell something behind her. It sounded like a protest, but she couldn't worry about that. She swung her axe right into the darkspawn's exposed back. It wasn't hard to miss, on a monster that big. The blade buried in near the spine, causing the monster to roar and spin back around. Marnan, for her part, held onto her axe, which was solidly stuck in the thing's thick hide. Thus when the ogre whirled, so did she, dangling from her weapon like an armor-plated puppet. The ogre's arms tried to reach around to grab her, but it couldn't seem to get to her. She smiled and braced herself against the monster, then surged upward. Daringly, she whipped a hand up and climbed, reaching one of the beast's horns. It whipped its head around and roared, but she clung on with the strength and tenacity of one born of the stone. Her axe was left in its lower back, unfortunately, and she dared not lose her grip enough to retrieve it. Instead, there was that familiar voice again. "My lady! Catch!" She looked up through the wild red mess that her unhelmed hair had become, and saw Gorim charging for her. He raised his own sword and let it loose, and it soared through the air between them. She risked releasing a hand and lunged up, catching the sword blade down in midair. Then, bracing against the back of the ogre's skull with her knees, she dared to grip the weapon with both hands, and brought it down swiftly and brutally into the darkspawn's eye. It roared in pain, and time seemed to slow down as it tumbled. She released her hold on the beast as it fell, falling less than gracefully from the thing's back. Gorim was there to catch her, saving her from too much injury, helmetless as she was. "My lady, the commander." Abruptly, she recalled the leader of their force, and broke away from Gorim's grip to hurry toward the broken form not far off. The battlefield was wet and slippery with gore, so she slipped slightly as she threw herself down beside him. "Lady Ejikin." He was still alive, thank the stone. "Commander, we must retreat. The darkspawn, they flanked us." "Call it." "My lady." The brave commander's eyes blinked blearily up at her, the light slowly fading from them. His breath was wheezy, and it looked like part of his chest plate had caved in. She was not so naive as to think that he could be saved from this. "You are very courageous, Commander Blackstone. I will be sure to tell your family of the honor you earned them here." His smile was weak, but warm. "That is all I can ask, my lady." His last wheezing breath slipped out from his lips, and Marnan bowed her head in a moment of solemnity. It couldn't last long, though, for other darkspawn were beginning to amass. Only the swords of Gorim and other brave warriors had provided her with even this respite. Decisively, Marnan stood. "Fall back. Retreat into the tunnels. Where is that blasted trumpet?" Someone, a dark-skinned dwarf with a blonde beard poking through his helmet, managed to find the horn in the gore. He immediately started blowing out the retreat cadence. Marnan watched as what was left of the dwarven line surged back, pushing against the darkspawn with enough force to break through. She raised her hand and pointed to the exit tunnel nearest the bulk of the line, and the survivors surged into it. Marnan cast one last look over the battlefield, the rock slide, the ogre corpse, her fallen brethren. As she did, she felt pride and sadness, courage and uncertainty. This battle was lost, but it had been fought well, and there would be more to come. There were always more battles to come, and Marnan fully intended to be a part of them. That was, provided her father let her continue to risk herself in this kind of battles, rather than the more complex, but just as deadly, kind that most of the nobility favored. Darkspawn, she could handle with honor and courage. It was the prospect of facing the assembly about this that terrified her. 3. The Scholar. Felicity Amel was a master of the art of storming. She could outstorm the most pompous of nobles, the most intimidating of warriors, and the most powerful of magisters, because, once stirred, her anger was something to be feared, and she would not cease the tempest until she had seen that whatever had upset her had been corrected. Or so he had once told her, laughter proprietarily hidden behind his helmet. The fearfulness of her righteous fury was never better demonstrated than now, as she stalked through the halls of the Circle Tower. She had one book tucked under her arm, a historical account of the Fourth Blight, but its presence was irrelevant, merely a vestige of the dutiful studies she had been engaged in when word had reached her. The mages were leaving. Well, not all of them, obviously. Some were to stay behind, continuing their studies as usual. That was part of the problem. Felicity whirled around a corner and through an open doorway, and there stood the intended target of her storming, serenely packing her bags. Senior Enchanter Wynne smiled warmly up at Felicity as she entered. "Ah, it's good to see you, Miss Amel. Have you come by to say your farewells? If so, you mustn't worry. Why aren't I coming with?" The young woman snapped. Her black hair and dusky skin made the outrage in her dark eyes flash all the brighter. Wynne did not look surprised by the demand. She unbent from over her bags, taking a moment to stretch her back. "Ah, I remember when I was so impatient." Felicity didn't have time for Wynne's lectures. The senior enchanter was something of a mentor to her, so Felicity felt the older woman owed her an explanation for this. "I have always been the top of my class. I have an excellent grasp of magical theory, herbalism, history, tactical theory, all things that will no doubt be useful on a battlefield. And I've been studying the Darkspawn day and night ever since word reached us that the king was calling the mages in. I know things. I can help. Take me away from here." Away from him. Wynne thought, obviously choosing her words carefully. "Perhaps the first enchanter thought it best not to interrupt your studies. If I recall, you are working on no less than 3 theses at the moment, correct?" "Well, yes." Felicity fumbled, momentarily losing her grip on her anger as she considered that. "It would be a pity to set aside my study on the connection between entropic magic and, but no. That's not the point." She shook her head, resolutely pulling her anger around her again. "This is a snub. I wasn't even approached with the offer. Not all mages in the tower were. And consider, Miss Amel, that you are amongst the most junior of the circle. Our youth are our future. I suspect Irving did not want to risk as promising a scholar as you." Felicity sagged, her energy seeping out of her as her anger did. Replacing it came a wave of bitterness. "We both know there's more to it than that." She wrinkled her nose, staring down at the book that was for some reason still in her arms. "The king wants power, doesn't he? Magical power, I mean. He wants fireballs, and quagmires, and the wrath of the Maker summoned from on high. And I can't provide that." Wynne's eyes were gentle with compassion as she stepped forward and enfolded the younger mage into a warm hug. "It will come, my dear, if you only have the will and the patience. And I know you well enough to know that you certainly do have the will." After a moment, Felicity pulled back and tried to master herself. She blinked back the tears that had suddenly come to her eyes, taking deep breaths so as not to let them fall. A mage was dignified and wise. They didn't cry like spurned schoolgirls just because the bigger kids didn't want to play with them. "I simply don't understand, why is it so hard for me? I understand the theory perfectly. You take the elements and fold them in the desired fashion to suit your ends, and then exert your magical energy proportionally to achieve the desired effect. There are so many treatises on different meditation techniques that can augment the placement of dash." Wynne laid a gentle hand on Felicity's shoulder, silencing her. With utmost confidence, Wynne repeated, "It will come. You are a brilliant young woman, Miss Amel, and a wonderful student, if I do say so myself. The circle is truly blessed to have such a mind among our ranks. Truly, I would hate to risk your safety at Ostagar, when you have such potential ahead of you." Felicity wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her robe, giving up the battle. She cast the older mage a watery smile. "I suppose I should be content with that, then." Wynne nodded and took a step back toward her bag, then paused, seeming to think of something. She turned back to Felicity with a thoughtful smile. "There is one more lesson, perhaps, that I can give you before I leave. Wynne, I am hardly the quiet little apprentice anymore. My dear, you never were particularly quiet, when it came to learning." Wynne smiled, mischief sparkling in her deep eyes. "Which is perhaps for the best, as one never does stop learning." Even at my age, the world contains its own lessons. Felicity rolled her eyes. If only so you can impart them on those younger than you, I suppose. What good, I ask, is having learned said lessons if no one else gains the benefit? Ah, but I am straying off topic. Wynne bent to dig through her bags for a moment, and stood back up holding a sewing needle. This is something we've worked on before, you recall, and you did seem to have a great deal better grasp on it than most of my students. Felicity was confused, until she added, excepting, perhaps, certain mages who have recently escaped again. Felicity perked up, clutching the book to her chest in anticipation. You speak of healing magic? But the creation branch of study is hopelessly complex. It cannot be properly taught in a single lesson. The theory is certainly complex, but I suspect you of all people will not have much problem with that. The practical application is really quite simple, requiring none of the forcefulness nor manipulation of primal or spirit manifestations. You must merely first understand that which you are affecting. Felicity leaned forward, taking the needle when offered. But, as you've said, we've been over it before. Unsuccessfully. Because the lesson lacked a practical element. I could hardly have let you apprentices prick yourselves, now could I? Goodness, the Templars would have gone absolutely mad. Prick like blood magic. No, of course not, but it would not be unexpected for them to jump to such conclusions. Don't you agree? Felicity nodded, sharing a mischievous look with Wynne. So, now that I am a full mage, it is hardly your place to say whether I might or might not prick myself. I should not be surprised that you understand so easily. Felicity carefully set the tome aside and inspected the needle. So what do I do? Merely understand that which you heal, Felicity. Understand it so fully that you merge with it and become one with it. Then let your energy flow into it, guiding it to where it needs to go, and the affected area will do the rest. Felicity nodded, carefully lowering the needle to the back of her hand. She bit her lip as she pricked the tip into her skin, wincing as she drew blood. Then, she pulled the needle across the skin, creating a shallow, but irritated, scratch. She closed her eyes and let her magic flow into the injured hand. She could picture the hand from her anatomy studies, all the bones and muscles that came together to form the universal instrument. She let her magic rush through it, until it coalesced on the tiny injury. Warmth infused the area, and then a sudden itching as the broken skin knit back together. When she opened her eyes and released her magic, the skin was smooth and unmarred. Very good, Miss Amel. I do believe I told you so. Felicity couldn't help the excited smile she cast at the elder woman. This is, oh, thank you, Wynne. It is, as ever, my pleasure. Now, do make sure to practice every day. You can only get stronger and more confident by doing so. Felicity nodded, pocketing the needle. Thank you, and good luck at Ostagar. Thank you. I have the utmost confidence that, if Ferelden works together, we can succeed. I will have returned before you even know I'm gone, particularly if you bury yourself in your studies as much as you usually do. The gentle teasing made Felicity blush, but she was too elated over her personal accomplishment to take any offense. I have rather busied myself since my harrowing, haven't I? And not necessarily in studying, more the fool I. I dare say these last months have been the happiest and most productive I've seen you. And that is certainly saying something. The younger mage smiled shakily and turned to start away, and then paused, the mention of harrowings bringing up something else that had been bothering her lately. Is there something else, dear? Hesitantly, Felicity turned back to face Wynne fully. There is one thing. There have been whispers among the other mages. I was wondering if they were true. Wynne regarded her curiously. I would say that would depend upon the whispers, though it's hardly polite to listen to gossip. It was probably a good thing Wynne did not listen to current gossip, but that wasn't pertinent to this discussion. Well, it is simply, they are saying that the next harrowing will be Kazarsurana. Ah. The elder mage spoke that single word as if it contained all the understanding in the world, a mildly perplexing puzzle clicking into place. Is it true? Felicity demanded, finding an echo of that righteous indignation that had brought her here in the first place. If so, you must realize he is far too young. One of the youngest to have been put through the harrowing, if my readings on it are to be believed. Really, 16. You are not upset about his youth, Wynne said, ever the shrewd one. Felicity's rant was cut short at that, and she took a moment to muster herself. Well, it's just the timing. They intend to take him to Ostagar, don't they? Bitterly, she glared at Wynne, daring the elder to deny it. And why not, I suppose? A mage as talented at wreaking destruction and havoc as him ought to do quite well at decimating an army of darkspawn, right? And I'm sure the little cretin would enjoy it, too. Everyone benefits. Felicity. Wynne's voice was gentle, but firm. Even if the rumors were true that Khazar will be harrowed soon, which, given his natural aptitude, I would certainly not be surprised, I assure you that Irving has no intention of sending him to Ostagar. As you said yourself, Mr. Serana is far too young, and he has that, rather volatile personality to account for as well. Rest assured that neither Uldred nor I would permit him to come with us. That soothed her outrage. Truly. Truly. Now go attend to your studies, my dear. I suspect you have a number of projects waiting for you. Felicity sighed and nodded, retrieving her book from where she'd set it. She turned to leave, and then paused once more. Really, now. Felicity studied her slippers. Stay safe, Wynne. I couldn't have gotten as far as I have here without you. I fear the other enchanters find me quite insufferable. Hardly true, my dear, but I do appreciate the sentiment. Farewell. Farewell. Felicity cast one last smile back, then finally left. Her step was much lighter as she crossed the tower back to her studies. For the Playboy. All right, Hugo. Just like we talked about. The Maberry barked softly in response to Percival's whisper. Kneeling as the noble was, he was at his hound's eye level. Remember, adorable eyes, he whispered conspiringly. You're a cute little puppy. No digging in the flow herbied or getting too sloppy with the kisses, all right. Hugo quirked his head to one side with a soft whine. Well, yes. You can give some kisses, but no sloppy ones. That's my job, and you know it. The Maberry barked once again, and, at Percival's pat, bounded out of the bushes and across the courtyard. Percival remained hidden, crouched in the bushes on one side of the Cowsland Estate's courtyard. The position kept him from prying eyes, although, admittedly, not particularly well, since his sandy blonde hair, swept dashingly back into a tail of course, did tend to catch the sunlight, while still affording him a view of the entire yard. It was a vital position for observing his current prey. She was a pretty blonde thing, the daughter of one of the knights his father had summoned for the march south. She would be worried about her father's upcoming battles, and afraid of the unfamiliar environment. It was a challenge that was, in all honesty, beneath his skills, but that bust and those eyes simply made her impossible to turn down, unsportsmanlike though it may be. She startled as the Maberry came bounding up to her, nearly dropping her needlework, and Percy wondered if he shouldn't have told Hugo to approach calmly. Ah well, too late to call him back now. Nice dog, she said uncertainly, leaning away from him in obvious fear. Percy snorted to himself, as ever surprised that anyone could find Hugo intimidating. Then again, he was the imprinted master, so he supposed the Maberry gave him special treatment. Hugo played his part well enough. He sat on the grass outside of threatening range, cocking his head and whining softly in a plea to be petted. Percy couldn't tell from his vantage point, but he was certain the Maberry was giving the girl the full force of his puppy dog eyes. It was a look that Percival Cowsland wasn't half bad at pulling off himself. Tentatively, the girl reached out and patted Hugo's head. Hugo's tail started wagging gleefully at the attention, but he was smart enough not to start barking and rolling around like he probably wanted to. Instead, he sat still, letting the girl become more confident in her attention. Well, you're just a sweet doggy, aren't you? The girl said, smiling as she scratched behind Hugo's ears. Hugo responded with a couple happy licks to the girl's hand. She subtly wiped it on her skirts. Where's your master, I wonder? That was his cue. Percival bounded up to the dog, pretending to be relieved to have found him. Hugo, there you are. Wandering off again. Bad dog. The Maberry tilted his head with a confused whine, but it didn't matter because the girl was quick to jump to the dog's defense. Percy liked her more and more. He wasn't doing anything wrong, sir. Just saying hi, really. Well, I'm sorry if he bothered you. I love the dog, but by the maker is he ever a handful? Really, he wasn't any trouble. She smiled. It's sweet that you care for your dog like that. And why wouldn't I? Thank you very much, my lady, for finding him. Her face went red, but her smile brightened further, her gaze lowering demurely. Oh, I'm no lady, you may call me Yulie. Ah, Yulie. A beautiful name, fit finely to such a beautiful girl. Her blush turned scarlet, but that was definitely interest sparking in her eyes. An innocent sort of interest, truly, though it was full of curiosity. Percival had no qualms about sating such curiosity. Well, I thank you, my lord, for your kind words. Might I have your name? Percy. Tell me, Yulie, what brings you to Highever? I don't know that I've seen you before, surely, I would have remembered. Her hand covered her face, but she didn't protest as he lowered himself onto the bench beside her. We're staying here while my father marches south with the rest of the Terns men. What of you? Do you live here? He nodded. That I do. My father, too, is marching south, as is my elder brother. Her blue eyes widened fretfully. A brother, too? You must be so worried for them. Such pretty, clear blue eyes. That I am, frightfully so. I would that I could go with them, but I must stay and look after my mother while they are away. That is very sweet of you. He smiled, and he could practically see the effect his maker-blessed facial features were having on her. He couldn't deny it, he knew he was handsome, all manly lines, an athletic build, golden hair, and just enough stubble about his chin to hint at roguish charm. It was like the maker wanted him to be like this, really. Kind of you to say so. Tell me, do you have someone to look after you while your father is away? She shook her head. Shyly, she said, perhaps. Her gaze flickered to the long sword Percival always wore strapped across his back. Oh, I hate to impose. Say no more, my dear Yulie. I will certainly do what I can to protect you. He took her hand and kissed the back, and she practically melted right there on the bench. Percival wondered whether this wasn't going just a bit too quickly to be truly any fun. Unhand her, knave. Ah, never mind. Enter the obstacle that would make the hunt so much sweeter. Percival turned to see an older man stalking across the yard toward them. He was dressed in chain, and carrying a worn broadsword in one hand. Yulie jumped from the bench. Father! It's not, he's not. Yulie, stay out of this. The knight stopped in front of Percy to glare down at him menacingly. Don't think I didn't see the look in your eyes, boy. My daughter will not be sport for some low-life rake. Percival couldn't help but be amused, because this man certainly didn't know who he was. However, he was content to let it continue as such, if it made things more interesting. He quirked an eyebrow up at the older man. I can't help but notice, good sir, that you have your sword drawn. Do you intend perhaps to use steel to make your point? I know of no better way. Stand down, or draw your own. For a lady as lovely as your daughter, I fear I must meet your challenge, sir. He stood and grinned, his own sword slipping out of its sheath with an exhilarating hiss. The knight's sword came down at him, and the battle was joined. The knight was skilled, as was hardly surprising of one of his rank and experience. However, his moves were fairly typical of Highever forces, who were exactly the kinds of fighters Percy had trained with all his life. The man's steady, straightforward swinging held no surprises, much to Percival's disappointment. He parried each blow sent toward him, and was quick to cut in with his own. The other man was obviously thrown off guard by his skill, perhaps not expecting the younger to actually be passing handy with a blade. It made Percival smile. He may succumb to the vice of sloth in most areas of his life, but there were two things he was very, very good at. One of those things was sword play. Well, the other one was too. After a fashion. Percival's velvet outfit was soon matted with sweat as he dodged and struck. He'd gotten 2 touches in quick succession, where the knight only had 1. Yuli watched the duel with a fretful expression, biting her lip as her gaze passed between them. Hugo stood beside her, barking happily in encouragement. The knight swept in, the older man's fatigue making him reckless, and Percival swept his sword aside. Then, the younger man stepped into his reach to place the blade of his sword square at the knight's throat. Defeated, the older man lowered his own blade and stepped back. Glowering, the knight admitted, "You're a good hand with a sword, I'll give you that." "It certainly is the only thing he puts any effort into," a voice spoke behind them. "Or rather, one of two things." Percival turned sheepishly to greet his father, who arched an aristocratic eyebrow at him. "Picking fights with my men, are you, pup?" "To be fair, father," he issued the challenge. "Not I. And I'm certain you gave him no cause, then." Bryce Cousland cast a meaningful look at Yuli, who was still standing fretfully off to one side. Percival rubbed the back of his neck, grinning, and he could tell his father was being very careful not to be amused by any of this. The knight, for his part, looked horrified. He stared wide-eyed at Percival, obviously realizing that he'd called the son of Terran Bryce Cousland of however a low-life rake. Then, the man threw himself to his knee in front of Percival. My apologies, my young lord. I had no idea." "Obviously not," Percival laughed. "It's fine, Sir Gerald," father spoke up, gesturing for the man to stand. "This is my younger son, Percival. Pup, this is Sir Gerald. A man I would prefer fighting at my side with his whole mind at Ostagar, not worrying that his daughter's virtue may be prey to your charms back here." The admonition was firm enough, though certainly nothing like what mother or Nan could have doled out. All the same, Percival sighed. "I apologize, father. And to you, Sir Gerald. But, your daughter is truly lovely." He gazed at her fondly, and she blushed and gave him a little smile. "I simply couldn't help myself. Really, pup. If you only put as much effort into disciplining yourself as you did into your sword work." Percy shrugged, unapologetic. "Discipline has never been one of my virtues. Of that, Nan has taken pains to inform me." There, Bryce cracked the barest of smiles. "Now, off with you before you make this situation any worse. I have other matters to discuss with Sir Gerald, here." Percival bowed and turned to leave, but he could feel Yuli's blue-eyed gaze following him. She looked, enchanted. Ensnared by the roguish noble's son who thought to give her attention. Subtly, he turned and winked at her, a promise of things to come. And thus he left the courtyard on a high note, Hugo trailing gaily at his heels. 5. The thug. "We are dead. We are so very, very dead." Leske banged his head back against the unforgiving stone wall, wishing that it would swallow him up before Jarvia or someone came back. "I thought we were in trouble when he caught us trying to smuggle that lyrium, but this is gonna be so much worse. Would you shut up?" His companion's voice rumbled from the other cell. "Birat's not gonna kill us. No, he's gonna torture us first. Make us pay for what happened in pain, then, he's gonna kill us. He's not gonna kill us." The shadows in the adjoining cell diagonal to his shifted, and Leske thought he could maybe see his friend's hazel eyes glittering out of them. His companion's dusky skin and dust-colored hair were certainly too hard to make out. They always made his friend seem to blend into the shadows, even when he wasn't trying to. "We're not gonna let him." And so just how are we not going to let him, Leske stood and walked to the bars of his cell, hoping to get a better view of his friend. "Oh, I know, you can sneak out of here by stealing Jarvia's armor. Just mind the boss doesn't try to grope you on your way out." The shadows moved again, and a figure detached from them. Garot's cornrows were a mess, and the dim light illuminated very little of his scruffy, broad-featured face. What little Leske could see was glaring at him. "You must have gotten hit on the head, too, Leske," the other duster's rumbling bass said. "Because I seem to remember that stealing Everard's armor was your idea." Leske slumped against the bars, because the other dwarf had a point. "We shoulda killed that drunk in the pits." No use dwelling on it. Garot turned away from the bars, and Leske lost sight of him again. The duster did, however, hear something shuffling around, and then a soft snap. "Hey, what are you doing? Coming up with a plan. Oh goody. Leske dropped to the floor again. Hope this one works better than your. Let's try to sneak lyrium out of a crowded tavern. 1. Genius, buddy. Genius. Says the one who decided a duster could pose as a warrior, and then didn't have the brains to at least tie the real warrior down so he didn't wander onto the field and expose everything. Leske opened his mouth to protest, then sighed. Yeah. We've both been dumbass lately, huh. Garrot made a low rumbling sound that might have been a grunt of agreement, a growl, or a laugh. Sometimes, it was hard to tell with him. Leske sat in silence for a moment, listening to the continued sounds of rustling in the other cell, punctuated by occasional wooden cracks. Really, what are you doing? There are some bits of old wood in here. Splinters. And so, we're going to, what? Throw wood shavings at the guard. No, we're gonna punch the guard in the face and take his stuff. After using the splinters to pick the lock. Leske blinked, thoughtful. Will that even work? Using wood to pick a metal lock. Only one way to find out, ain't there? The sounds in Garrot's cell paused. And it's not like we don't have time to try. Birat's not gonna want us to die too quick. Leske groaned, again wanting to pound his head into the stone until oblivion came. How in the name of the ancestors do you make being slowly tortured over a period of days or weeks sound like a good thing? What can I say? Garrot's voice rumbled, and this time, it was a laugh. I'm an eternal optimist. Now shut your trap and let me save our asses. And that's what Leske did. 6. The Hunter. As keeper of the Sabre clan, Maraithari had seen her share of tragedies, and she had little doubt that she would see more. It was the way of the Dalish, to bear their tragedies with dignity and strength, nurturing the seeds that the past gave them so that the future might bud and thrive. That did not, however, make the sight before her any easier to bear. The worst of the young warrior's sickness had abated, for the time being. The young woman was up and moving about with the same pride that she always had. To a stranger, it might perhaps seem that Mila Mahariel was not ill at all. Maraithari, however, was no stranger. There were signs, and telling ones. It was in the way Mila's step across the rough ground was slightly less confident as she retrieved her arrows from the practice range. It was in the way her bow quivered as she raised it once more to take aim. It was in the upward tilt of her chin as she loosed the next arrow, defying her aim to falter, and then in the way that it inevitably did, the arrow striking the target a hair's breadth from the center. Mila Mahariel was dying, and the young warrior knew it, deep down. The keeper sensed a presence moving up to stand beside her a moment before the stranger spoke. I admit, I certainly did not expect her to be back at it so soon. Any other victim of the taint would be at rest. You obviously do not know her, nor us, Duncan. I apologize if I offended. This human, Duncan of the Grey Wardens, was cautious with his words, but honest and brave where it mattered. Maraithari could respect that. In addition, she could hardly begrudge the man who had saved the young hunter's life, and who was seeking to do so again. Maraithari turned away from the sight of Mila at archery practice, turning her full attention to the warden. Do not apologize, merely learn. Our people are proud, warden, and Mila is prouder than most. She will not easily agree to go with you. Certainly, she can be convinced to see reason, Duncan began, but then paused at Maraithari's doubtful expression. Truly? She would refuse my offer, even if doing so means her death. You must understand, Duncan. To submit to a human is something we Dalish have sworn never to do again. To her, this will seem a submission, which she will then see as a betrayal of the clan. She will rather die than betray the clan. Duncan was silent for a time, casting his gaze over to the warrior in question, at practice at the camp's archery range. Mila was lithe, but strong, her tanned skin decorated with the Valislin of Andruil, goddess of the hunt. Her fierce forest green eyes were, as ever, trained entirely on her target, unflinching even as she loosed her bowstring. Her hair was red as wildfire, and strung with various beads that she had carved herself from the bones of her slain hunts, the only trophies the young woman allowed herself to indulge in. In another time and place, Mila might have been considered beautiful, with her smooth face and easy grace, but Mila was too hard and intense for any man to have ever considered courting her as more than a passing thought. Marathari suspected that was the way the young huntress preferred it. She had never shown interest in any of the young men of the clan, only in her duty. The girl was as strong and proud as a grand oak tree, and just as immovable once she had set her roots down. Marathari did not want to see her fall because of it. "What do you suggest I do?" Duncan's voice asked, and the keeper was impressed. The warden's voice was genuinely querying, trusting in her wisdom and experience in this matter. A rare human indeed. "Nothing, for the moment. I will speak with her." Duncan nodded. They both saw Mila double over briefly, her face contorted with pain. Marathari laid a hand on Duncan's arm, wordlessly keeping him from going to the young elf's side. A moment later, Mila straightened again, her face as impassive and her posture as strong as if the previous seconds had never occurred. "I see what you mean, Keeper," Duncan said. "I shall leave it to you, then. You are a wise one, Warden. We will come speak with you in a moment." Marathari stepped forward, turning her attention fully to the warrior in front of her. A warrior, and an accomplished one, but also still a child in many ways. "Delenn, I would speak with you." Mila lowered her bow and respectfully turned to greet the keeper. "What is it, Harin? Have you spoken with the Shemlin about my cure?" "I have." She drew up beside the young woman, mustering her strength to speak these words. "For the girl's sake. You will not like it." Mila's brow knit in confusion, but she did not speak. It was not her way to question the keeper, who was the mouth of the clan. To one such as Mila, the clan was everything. That was what would make this so difficult. "Duncan will be leaving soon. You must go with him, Delenn." Mila's green eyes lit with inner fire, but she remained otherwise hard and immovable. "You ask me to leave the clan. I realize I have only brought hardship these past days. What happened to Tamlin because of my complacency weighs on my soul, and I will gladly pay penance for it. But, to cast me out is disproportionate." It was as close to a plea as the huntress ever got. The fire in the girl's eyes held anger, and resolution, of course, but also fear. "I am not casting you out, Delenn. In truth, I wish there were some other way. But it seems that the creators have crafted you for a different purpose than we had anticipated, and your path must diverge from ours. I do not understand." Flat. Defiant. Hiding much fear. "When I was treating your illness, Delenn, I noticed things about it. It corrupts rather than destroys, and that is what makes it impossible to cure by any means the creators have bestowed upon me. According to Duncan, this is the taint of the dark spawn. I have managed to delay it, Delenn, but I cannot stop it. The only known cure is to become a Grey Warden." Mila's green eyes flashed at the mention of the Warden's name. "And you would trust the word of a Shemlin?" "The Grey Wardens have long been allies to our people," Marathari said sternly. "This you know. This is why I trust that human to do what is best for you, dear child. I will not do it." And then, as if deeming the discussion over, Mila raised her bow and returned to her target practice. Marathari's slow temper stirred, but she tamped it down. This was not Meryl, who could be led with a mere expression of disapproval. Light touches, with this child. It is either that, or die. Then I will die. Better to die here among the Elvain than to walk with the Shemlin and not have the right to exact payment for their crimes. Marathari sighed. "Then what of us, Delenn? Do you not care that your clan would prefer that you live?" That made the huntress pause, her jaw tightening. Slowly, the girl lowered her bow again. "What good could I be to the clan if my bow is not here to fight for it? You could do much good for the clan, merely by fighting that which might consume our lands if left alone. If the darkspawn taint the land, the Elvain will have no homeland to rediscover." Mila stared across the range at her target. The young warrior was faltering, the harsh wood of the great oak finally bowing. It was testament to just how much this taint was affecting her. And testament to her own strength that she continued to fight against it. "Do it for Tamlin, Delenn. Destroy that which destroyed him. That is how you might honor his memory. It is what the creators crafted you for." Mila's gaze dropped, finally, in defeat. "Very well, Harin. I will go with the Shemlin. For Tamlin. Tentatively, Maridhari reached out and placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder, as she had not done for many years. Mila merely shrugged her off and raised her bow to continue her archery practice. Maridhari made no comment about the tears she saw in the proud warrior's eyes. When the time came, after Tamlin's funeral had been resolved, the clan embraced their wayward sister one last time. Mila bore their farewells with the strength and courage that Maridhari had come to expect in the young woman, walking with chin held high as Duncan led her off into the forest. But when Mila reached the top of the final ridge that would take her out of sight of her clan, her head turned one last time to look back, and the keeper could read all of Mila's heartbreak and terror in that gesture alone. Walk ever forward, Delenn. Never hesitating, nor looking back. Maridhari said quietly. Walk forward until our paths cross again. 7. The Prodigy. Jowan hurried through the corridors of the circle tower, his shoes scuffing loudly against the stone floor. Whispers had passed through the tower mere minutes ago. Khazar was awake, and, apparently, not as demon-possessed as several of the Templars had been wagering. One of the Templars had even joked that he was tempted to stab that uppity knife-ears anyway, and claim he was. At least, Jowan hoped it was a joke. Please Maker, let it have been a joke. The apprentice ran his right hand absently along the tiny scar on his left wrist as he walked. Jowan hadn't even found out that Khazar had been taken away until early that morning, when he'd returned to the apprentice quarters to find Khazar's bunk empty. Jowan had been out of bed all night himself, first with Lily, and then practicing his new hobby. Not that he meant anything bad by it, of course. It was just supposed to give him the edge he needed to be submitted for his harrowing. He entered the quarters and headed to the last row of bunks down the line. Sure enough, Khazar was awake, and staring at the brand new mage robes in his lap as if they were a poisonous asp. So? How does it feel? Jowan asked, coming to rest against his own bunk, which was opposite Khazar's. The elf wrinkled his nose. How is it that something can feel like both a badge of honor and a leash at the same time? Finally, Khazar looked up and met Jowan's eyes, and Jowan was surprised to see no real happiness in his fellow's expression. Instead, those grey eyes held only their usual cynicism and hints of that ever-present temper that the elf was so infamous around the tower for, expressions that were ill-suited to such a young face. And Khazar was young. At 16, he was as of this morning one of the youngest mages to ever pass the harrowing. He looked it, too, he was small and delicate, even by elven standards. His strawberry blonde hair was styled in a boy's cut short and feathered, though he claimed he kept it like that so it didn't get in the way during spellcasting. The way Khazar Sirana approached spellcasting, Jowan believed that. The elf's face was traced with light tattoos that suggested a fire dancing across it, fearsome and beautiful at the same time. Many of the younger apprentices believed that the elf had been given those tattoos before he came to the tower, and that it meant he was Dalish. Older apprentices, like Jowan, remembered well that this was not the case. Khazar had simply shown up to class with them one day when he was 12. When asked about them, the elf offered no explanation. Besides, Khazar had been brought to the tower when he was 4. Everyone knew he didn't remember his real family, so what would it matter if he was Dalish? Jowan sagged against his bed, discouraged at his young friend's lack of enthusiasm. I admit, I would have thought you'd be more excited. TCH. Khazar picked at a stitch in the mage robes. Sure, I am. Now I get to walk on the second floor of the circle tower without getting funny looks. Hurrah and huzzah, I feel the world opening up before me. Well, at least your harrowing's over and done with, right? Jowan paused to check that they were out of earshot of any other apprentices, then leaned in. What was it like, by the way? Khazar arched an eyebrow at him, a knowing smile flickering across his tattooed face. You really want to know? Of course I do. Nah, I don't think you do. Better to just let you sit and wait for your own. Half the fun is the mystery, you know. You are a very cruel little elf. Just so you know. Finally, Khazar barked a laugh and beckoned Jowan forward. Jowan's heart was in his throat as he leaned over his smaller friend, even as Khazar's eyes danced with secrets. They make you fight a demon. Jowan's heart stuttered, and distant guilt flashed through him, quickly shoved aside. What? You're putting me on, aren't you? Khazar grinned, his eyes lit with excitement in a way Jowan had rarely seen from the younger apprentice. I'm serious. They make you fight a demon. The elf laughed giddily and motioned for Jowan to step back, which he did. Then, Khazar spread his hands in front of him, palms facing one another, and conjured a roaring flame between them. Jowan flinched back, momentarily taken off guard by the sudden heat and light. When he looked back, Khazar had shaped the fire into a creature that Jowan had seen only in books, a rage demon. While Jowan watched, Khazar made the manifestation gesture and swipe, like a puppeteer playing with a rather deadly puppet. Then, just as abruptly as he'd summoned it, Khazar dismissed the flame and leaned forward again. Did you know that rage demons are immune to fire? He said, his voice picking up speed in obvious excitement. I didn't. I kept blasting it with flames, but the demon didn't even feel it. So then, I switched to lightning, and zap. Khazar illustrated the story by sending a thin bolt of lightning arcing over Jowan's head, making the older apprentice duck on reflex. Dead demon. Why do I get the feeling, Jowan said, hesitant to uncurl from his protective hunch, that you enjoyed fighting the demon. And why not? Khazar snapped indignantly. It sure as the Fade made a better target than a couple practice dummies or a shielded enchanter who's pulling his blows. With that demon, I didn't have to worry about being scolded for being too enthusiastic. He rolled his eyes. I ask you, how am I supposed to know what I can do if the only place I'm allowed to do it is in the Fade, which is literally in my dreams? Perhaps now that you're a full mage, they'll let you practice a bit more freely. Khazar fell back on his bed as he snapped, on who? The Templars. He paused, his eyes narrowing with a smirk. Though I certainly wouldn't mind that. Just for curiosity's sake, of course, see how effective their so-called anti-magic disciplines are when they're simultaneously turned to stone and on fire. You have a rather disturbing imagination, my friend. It'd be funny, though, right? Khazar's smirk broadened. I think I'll write my first paper about it. The study of the effects of the Templar Order pissing me off. I'd have to do some in-depth research, test it out on lots of Templars. Jowan chuckled. And to think that some people were suggesting they make you tranquil. Khazar laughed. If they tried, I'd give them good reason to. Nothing says, tranquilize me, like a fireball to the face, right? If they tried, I'd take this entire damned tower down with me. He smiled sharply, apparently getting lost in imaginings of doing just that. Jowan bit his lip, his right hand once again going to that little scar on his left wrist. The mention of tranquilling reminded him of why he'd sought out Khazar in the first place this morning. However, it could wait. When Khazar was in one of his I like to burn things moods, it was not a good time to ask for favors. Then again, it rarely was. 8. The first arrival at Ostagar. I do not understand. Mila said flatly. I have received word of something that must be investigated in Orzammer. The Shemlin actually acted sincere, the nerve of him. I apologize, but I'm afraid your joining must wait. The only outward sign of her outrage was her jaw tightening. You pull me from my people, take me overland to this ruin for some human ruler's stand against the Darkspawn, and then tell me you are leaving me here alone? Is this a customary way for you humans to treat your warriors? The trio of Grey Wardens who had greeted Duncan and Mila as they'd come into Ostagar exchanged glances behind their commander's back. They'd borne an urgent message from the Durgan Len, apparently, something that drew the Warden commander back out of Ostagar barely 5 minutes after they'd stepped foot in it. You will not be alone, Mila. There are many here who will help you get settled in. The King's men, the other Wardens, mages, and the like. All Shemlin. Duncan forged on. There is one other recruit present, as well. A knight by the name of Ser Jori. Perhaps the two of you might meet. I have nothing to say to his kind. Duncan's expression darkened. His kind are going to be your comrades in arms. You will be, at the least, civil to them. Mila looked hard at the human man, taking in the stern expression on his face, and the commanding tone of his voice. Perhaps if she had been a human, she might have balked. But she was not. She was Dalish. And the Dalish took orders from no human. Make me, she said defiantly. Then, she spun and stalked off, past the protesting guard out of camp and straight into the woods. If she had to wait in Ostagar for the Shemlin warden's convenience, she would at least be productive and independent. She'd compromised once just by being here. Vir Borasan, bend but never break. She wasn't going to submit to his commands any more than necessary. 9. Just another day in the Denerim market. At some point in the last 2 days, the weapons merchant who worked the stall on the northwest corner of the market square had picked up a pair of daggers. Usually, Finian's fingers didn't get twitchy around the weaponsmith. Anything that could potentially be used against the gracious overlords wasn't allowed in the alienage, and being caught with pointy things was more trouble than even Finn could probably weasel out of. But still, his mother had instilled in him a certain appreciation for fine weaponry, so he liked to stop by the stall every now and then to admire the new wares. The daggers were twins. They weren't particularly fancy, no gaudy jewels or gold leaf or anything equally flashy. No, the craftsmanship in these was simple and subtle. They were steel, the blades sharpened to a fine point that glittered in the morning sunlight. The crossguards were crisp and solid despite their delicacy, and the pommels the perfect size, so that Finian suspected they might be balanced for throwing as well as wielding. Just looking at them was enough to make his fingers twitch, and not for the usual reasons. These were no easily pawnable jewels that could help pay for a new set of sheets at the alienage orphanage, nor was it some alienage elder's absolutely perfect gift, to be doled out when he next got into trouble. No, for once, these were things he wanted to have, just for the sheer pleasure of having them. But how to get them past the alienage guards? Well, it shouldn't be too difficult. He snuck things in and out of the alienage all the time, the only difference being that these were specifically forbidden. That had never really been a deterrent before, anyway. Finian didn't even need to think about it anymore. One moment, he was striking up a conversation with the weapon merchant, pretending to be the curious servant of a lord interested in equipping his garrison. The next moment, he was walking away with one dagger stowed precariously up each sleeve, his prizes kept out of view merely by the particular way he curved his wrists. It was a moment of triumph, as all such little thefts were. Finian couldn't deny the thrill of it, outwitting the mark, nudging them in just the correct fashion with words or guile, and then the subtle motions that distracted and misled at the same time they secured the desired item and hid it about his person. He didn't really even care all that much about monetary reward, though the ability to fund the alienage less fortunate was definitely a perk. No, to Finn, the real prize lay in the game itself. He wondered if he'd still be able to play such games when he was married, to Maker, a woman? How would he even? No. Best not to think about that now. It took him by surprise, to want the daggers for their own sake, but he wasn't really of a mind to question it. Honestly, the things had reminded him of his mother, and he was content to leave it at that. Tabri, I'm beginning to think you want to be thrown in Fort Dricken for theft. If so, you need only have asked. Finian paused, turning a cheeky grin to the familiar figure of Sergeant Keelan, the poor officer in charge of the Denerim market district. He must have really ticked off someone important, to be stationed in the criminal capital of Ferelden. Well, you know me, Sergeant. I'm too shy to speak my mind. Not good with words, you know. Yes. The sergeant's posture was forbidding, yet tired. Roll up your sleeves. Ah, but the sergeant was too proficient at his job for his own good. Well, for Finian's good, anyway. Is something the matter, Sergeant? Or perhaps you have simply taken up an interest in people's wrist decorations. I understand embroidered bracelets have become something of the fashion in Antiva. While he spoke, Finian carefully adjusted the dagger in his right sleeve so that it was more secure. Having it fall out right now would be, while hilarious, badly timed, then used his right arm to fold the cuff of his left back, gripping the left arm dagger through the cloth. Alas, as you know, we elves can't afford anything like that. Though I do know a couple elves that wear fine gloves. The Dalish make excellent leather gloves, they say. Finian showed the sergeant his bare left wrist. As you can see, I'm not lucky enough to own a pair. Sergeant Keelan stood through Finian's little show with a flat expression. That was something Finian liked about the sergeant. He obviously saw through the mask, but he was just too jaded to reach out and yank it off. Sometimes, Finn wondered whether old Keelan didn't get a little enjoyment out of the games they played too. After a moment of silence, Keelan sighed and shook his head, exasperated. Antivan bracelets. Really? Do you just make those up on the spot? Finian grinned brightly and pulled his sleeve back down, recognizing the sergeant's capitulation. Would you know the difference if I did? Regarding jewelry? Not one whit. Keelan sighed again and started off. I'd tell you to keep your hands to yourself, Tabri, but we both know how effective that will be. Just try not to pickpocket anyone important today. I do love our little chats. Same time tomorrow. Probably, Keelan muttered as he walked off, disappearing among the stalls. When he was gone, someone laughed nearby. That was a fine bit of squirreling, the sergeant, that was. Don't know that I've ever seen anyone treat a law officer like that and keep his tongue afterward. Finian turned to see a wiry, scruffy man leaning casually against the mouth of the nearest alley. The man wore a crooked grin on his long face, as if sharing some joke. If the man hadn't been looking directly at him, Finian might have thought he was talking to someone else. Not many humans addressed elves out of the blue. Ah well, Finian was, if anything, adaptable. Sergeant Keelan and I have a strong relationship, forged by mutual apathy. It works well for us, so why change a good thing? I certainly suppose so. The man laughed. But still, you may want to take your own advice. Some nice leather bracers can do wonders to keep things nice and secure, you know. Finian eyed the man, while sticking his hands in his pockets so that he appeared non-threatening, but so he still could palm the pommels of his new daggers. Know that from experience, huh? The man matched him grin for grin. Might be that I do. He held out a hand. Name's Davith. Finian. The elf smirked and took the hand, noticing that this Davith was, indeed, wearing leather bracers. Do I have to pay for these tips in some horrible or degrading fashion, or are you new to Denerim? Davith threw back his head and brayed a laugh. That does about cover it, don't it? No, I just appreciate a good con when I see one. Never been much for it myself, you see. Too used to the old-fashioned cut and run. I've tried that, but it never works, Finn lamented. All the guards know where I live, what with me being an elf and all. Ah, that does limit things, doesn't it? A chuckle. Well, anyway, I thought I'd just give you your dues from one pier to another. Maybe I'll see you around the district. Probably will. All I ask is that you don't cut someone's purse while I'm trying to work them. It somewhat spoils the pitch, you know. Unless, of course, that's the point. Davith winked, then slid back into the alleyway, disappearing into the shadows. Finian adjusted the weight of the daggers in his sleeve as he headed toward the alienage. Perhaps the human cut purse had a point, and he knew a leather worker in the alienage who might have the time to whip him up a pair of bracers. It would make carrying these daggers around a possibility, to have such a form of concealment. All Finn needed was some pastries to satisfy the leather worker's notorious sweet tooth. Spotting a baker's cart crossing the district, Finian smiled and turned to take a quick detour. His fingers twitched in anticipation. 10 dwarves in the deep roads. Garrot Broska could not stop laughing. The topsiders who were now his traveling companions obviously thought he was crazy, and maybe he was. But sod it, he'd won. He'd beat the warriors in their own arena. He'd outmaneuvered the nobles by escaping justice for his crimes, though that was mostly the warden commander's doing. And he'd killed that slimy son of a bitch Birat. And now, instead of living out the rest of his days as some casteless thug, or some surface dwarf lost to the stone, he was becoming a stone-damned grey warden. One of the highest honors a dwarf could earn, second only to sodding paragonhood. Oh, by the stone. He should try to become a paragon next. The very idea sent him into paroxysms of laughter. As his latest bout died down, one of the wardens, a narrow-faced human named Emmett, cast him a curious look. This isn't usual for you, is it? If so, it seems an unusual tactic for battling darkspawn. What can I say, topsider? It's been a damn good week. He grinned and bit back a chortle. Anyone else kick an oppressive system in the balls recently? No, just me. His laughter slipped out, and there he went again. Rico was cared for. Leske was out from under Birat's thumb. Even that drunken whore of a mother of his had sobered up enough to goggle at his newfound status shift. Best sodding week ever. The commander and another warden returned from scouting a side tunnel, and Duncan only paused to give Garrot the briefest of exasperated looks, and that didn't help the dwarf's state at all. I believe we've found a way around the cave-in. This way. The small group of wardens started down the tunnel, leaving the grand, painstakingly constructed deep road for the rough-hewn labyrinthine corridors around it. A perfect metaphor for the whole of dwarven civilization, really. All pompous-ass grandeur, torn up and overtaken by dust. Dust. Dusters. Oh boy, and there he lost it again. I'm beginning to worry about the mental stability of the new recruit, sir, one of the wardens, IRA, told Duncan flatly. Fair bit more entertaining than that Dalish elf, though, isn't he? Said Emmett. Duncan grunted noncommittally, the sly dog. Deep breaths, deep breaths. You think I'm crazy, huh? Obviously, you ain't met many dwarves. Garrot's chuckles finally settled down into a crooked grin. I think it's all the lava in Orzammer. Fries the brains. If that's the excuse you're going for, said the archer, Reg. Then, as one, all four wardens tensed. Garrot had been with them in the deep roads for a couple days now, so he knew what that meant. The smirk fell off his face as he unhooked his hand axe and dagger from his belt. Instinctively, he slid into the shadow cast by a crevice in the tunnel wall, his natural dusty coloring making him blend in with it, as it always did. A moment later, a clump of wandering darkspawn rounded the corner of the tunnel ahead. They growled and charged, and the wardens met them with gusto, arrows flying and swords banging. Garrot, for his part, was unnoticed, so he used it to his advantage, slipping up behind one that was itself trying to sneak up behind IRA. A hand axe to the hamstring disabused it of that tactic, and when the darkspawn whirled on Garrot, it got a dagger up the nose for it. He pulled his weapons out of the darkspawn corpse and whirled away, just in time for a massive hurlock to come barreling into him with them all. Garrot received only a glancing blow from the hammer, but even that hurt a great deal. His left side immediately started to throb where it had been hit, and his dagger dropped. Growling low, Garrot stooped to the ground and scooped up some dirt, still dodging the swooping maul. He then introduced that dirt intimately to the darkspawn's eyes, making the hurlock hiss and hesitate for just a moment. It was all Garrot needed to slam his hand axe into a very unsportsmanlike part of the hurlock's anatomy, though who could say whether the blighters even used it, and then scooped up his dagger and stabbed it under the thing's armor and into its heart. The other wardens were just finishing off the rest of the darkspawn band. They were efficient, Garrot had to give them that. Then again, so was he. Let us move on, Duncan said, stowing his blades. There could very well be more coming. Yeah, no doubt drawn by the sound of this one losing his mind. Reg jerked a thumb toward the dwarf. Garrot smirked and flipped his dagger before sheathing it. The wardens turned to make a swift exit from the scene of the skirmish, but Garrot spotted some things on the field that got those wheels in his head turning. Among the darkspawn corpses were a bow, daggers, various bits of metal that had once been armor. He let the wardens get ahead of him, knowing he'd catch up in a moment. Instead, he deftly scooped up anything sharp or jagged and started tying them together, interlocking the scraps where he could. What are you doing? One of the wardens asked from up ahead. They'd stopped to watch him. Garrot smirked. Giving any darkspawn that follow us a little present. Finished, he tossed the contraption on the ground in a narrow part of the corridor, kicking dust over it to conceal its presence from the unwary enemy. The claw trap was weak and probably wouldn't last beyond the first bite, but that was still one darkspawn leg torn open. Think I should wrap it? Emmett snorted. Looks good to me as it is. Garrot stepped up to join the wardens, and they continued to delve into the deep roads together. They were back on the main highway before they encountered anything else. As they were heading down a long hall, they heard something scuffling around from the tunnel up ahead. The warden's lack of reaction meant it wasn't a darkspawn, but Garrot could hear the distinct creaking of armor. Reg raised his bow, and Garrot instinctually slipped into the nearest shadow. Whatever it was seemed to be getting closer, though at least it sounded like it was alone. It took a minute, but soon enough a dwarf-sized figure in mismatched armor walked bold as you please out onto the deep road. At first Garrot thought that it might be a genlock after all, but a look at the fair skin under its horned helm made Garrot realize that the dwarf-sized form was actually a dwarf. Go figure. The newcomer looked around for a moment, then spotted the wardens and said, "There you are." Like she'd found a lost nug, not a pack of armed grey wardens 2 days into the deep roads. The wardens startled, but lowered their weapons. Duncan, as ever, took the initiative. "You were looking for us? Do you bear a message of some kind?" "You might say that." The dwarf stepped toward them, taking off her horned helm as she did so, revealing a cascade of red hair and eyes as molten and angry as magma. Garrot felt his jaw drop, because he recognized this woman. What Orzammar citizen wouldn't? Sure, he'd never seen her in person, but all the stone cuts dedicated to her apparently bore her likeness close enough. Lady Ejikin. The boss apparently recognized her as well. Duncan hurried forward to inspect the noble. "Are you all right? What are you doing alone this far into the deep roads? Were you not leading your own forces elsewhere?" "I'd rather not speak of it." The princess stalked forward, joining the rest of the wardens. "Suffice to say that I am coming with you to the surface, if you'll have me." Garrot stayed in his shadow, studying her. The princess was not dressed in her usual Ejikin armor, nor was that any fancy noble's wearax on her back. No, her armor was a hodgepodge of stained and torn items, a leather chest plate, steel boots, chain gloves, and the wearax on her back was black and notched. Garrot had seen enough darkspawn weapons in the last few days to know one when he saw one. The warrior princess of Orzammar was alone in the deep roads and dressed like a scavenger, and it wasn't hard for Garrot to figure out what that meant. Laughter roared out of him, startling the wardens. The princess whipped out her wearax and spun on him, obviously not previously realizing he was there. "Not this again," Ira groaned. Garrot mastered himself and stepped out of the shadows, just so that the king's daughter could see his mocking bow. "Let me be the first, princess, to welcome you to the ranks of the casteless. Would you like your brand now, or later?" Her eyes flickered to the tattoo on his own cheek, and he could just imagine what was going through her mind. Her eyes flashed and she straightened. "And just who are you?" She seemed to be living up to the reputation of the infamous Spitfire of House Ejikin. Garrot wondered what she had done to get kicked out of it. "You don't need to know that." "Actually, Garrot, a bit of civility wouldn't go amiss," Duncan cut in thoughtfully, eyeing the princess with an impressed expression. "Especially if we're traveling together. If I might ask, Lady Ejikin dash." The princess flinched and interrupted, "Don't call me that. It is as this brand says. I am no longer a lady, nor an Ejikin." Duncan's face saddened, though Garrot rolled his eyes. He was this brand still, apparently. "Then what might we call you?" Duncan asked. "Marnan. My name is Marnan." "Marnan, then. What do you intend to do once you've reached the surface, Marnan?" Marnan frowned, then turned to set herself squarely before Duncan. "I was thinking about what you said at my feast. It seems as though I no longer have any commitments in Orzammar to hold me back. As such, I would like to join the Grey Wardens. If you'll have me." The other wardens started whispering, but Duncan just smiled. "Of course we will. It will be good to have one with such experience among us." She nodded, as if it was her due. Garrot couldn't help but note the wary glance she cast over at him, and he just scowled in response. So they were taking some uppity noble bitch back to Ostagar with them, huh? Suddenly Garrot didn't feel much like laughing anymore. Check the description for the links to the author.